Understand what black is, the source from which all things come, the security blanket for the stars. Understand what black is. It's not a color, it's the basis of all colors. It is not a complexion, it is a reflection of all complexions called human. And out of this blackness, passion flows like a river. Feelings tell the truth. Song and dance and making you laugh.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP.
Understand what black is. The breath you breathe. The sweat.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm even a little hesitant to interrupt the last poets, but we'll play them. We'll probably stop like 3 or 4 minutes before I normally do, maybe around 11:50. 53 or so, and just play the entire last poets. I always like to remind people that certainly hip hop and poetry and slams are important. People use those languages, but the last poets remain one of my favorites from the 60s and 70s. Just in terms of messaging. But when I think about that, also the word griot, G-R-I-O-T, seems a bit, whatever the griot words are in terms of communicating information and reality and perception over the centuries. There's always been griots, whether they've been called hip hop people or mystics or wisdom bearers or astrologers. There's always been a desire in humanity to kind of point us in the right direction. Today, to point us in the right direction, as well as to reveal truth. And although truth is evolving, still to just help us bring us back home to what a real truth is. We're going to discuss what real truth might be somewhat today, not necessarily only the metaphysical or intellectual or theological space, but even just in terms of the carceral state and incarceration, judicial procedures, the legal system. So we might not cover all these things today, gentlemen, with Don McCauley Jr. is with me and James Jeter. We might not cover all of these eternal issues about who's in prison and who isn't, or who should be. But we are going to at least touch upon it a little bit from a real humane, practical, real event situation. James Jeter's with us, as I mentioned, as well as Don McCauley Jr. I have a few, James. I have a few nicknames for Junior that I guess I can't reveal on air. But I don't really know some of your nicknames, but I'm sure you've been called a variety of things by your daughter and your number one significant other at the moment. Well, what title should we share with people today, James, in terms of what keeps you focused recently? What kind of job title?
Co-founders, executive director of the Full Citizens Coalition, program director of civic allyship at Dwight Hall at Yale.
Okay, so do me a favor and just repeat that once again, because those are some important appendages to your. I know dad and loving father are kind of your key titles, but say those IRS income designations again for me.
Co-founder and executive director of the Full Citizens Coalition, and program director of civic allyship at Dwight Hall at Yale.
Perfect. And Brother Don McCauley Jr., what are some of the IRS and slave name and government name designations that you have to abide by or recognize?
I am the owner of Athlete Alliance Consulting. I am the owner of Athlete Alliance Foundation and assistant professor of sport and entertainment management at Quinnipiac University.
And I wanted to get that out of the way, and for people to know that both of you come from a solid base of commitment, 24/7, 365. But James is going to enable us to kind of talk about some other issues related to his job, but related to all of our jobs, about what does it mean to be able to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and not be caught up in other people's web of their designs, their perceptions of us, their caring for us. We can care for ourselves. So, James, set the stage a little bit for us, and we have 55 minutes or so, so we don't have to rush, and we can also, quite frankly, I'm going to mention right now, we can also kind of circle back and do more. This does not have to be a one-off.
Yeah.
Have to be a one-off. So even if we just get 1 or 2 points across from 55 minutes, that's fine, because this is a topic that needs that we need to take the consistent deep dive on. So kind of set the stage about why when Junior called me, when Don McCauley Jr. called me the one night around 10 o'clock, he connected me with you, and we immediately jumped on kind of convening via Zoom today on Friday, September 15th.
Uh, broader issue is growing up in New Haven, growing up as a product of inner city New Haven. And being a wayward youth, having a lot of my experiences come out of being in the streets at a really young age and winding up in prison at a young age for an extensive amount of time. Coming home and having like a lot of doors open to me. One thing that hasn't escaped me is that there are those who I left who never belonged there. And the way that they got there was felonious. It was
It was criminal.
It was criminal. It was tied to something completely criminal and conspired between institutions that we look to uphold our communities and to uphold, truth and justice. And so you have a time period in the Navy Police Department where there was a lot of embedded corruption within the ranks, and you had a lot of that corruption play out in these courtrooms and be codified in the law by four ADAs in the New Haven assistant state attorney's office. And
and James, just on that point, just to clarify, you're suggesting that there's the assistant attorneys and others that have sent people to jail that were innocent.
Yes.
Is that fair? Is that fair to say?
Super fair.
Okay. So
willingly, and this is coming from somebody who has no claims of innocence. I own, and I daily work towards the harm that I've done to my neighborhood and to the overall community in New Haven. And yes, there are those who have been maliciously, criminally prosecuted in the city of New Haven. And we see it, but I don't think we understand what we're seeing. So we see it more of these individualized situations where, this guy comes home, and this guy comes home, and this guy's come home. And we don't look at the fact that this is actually a small group of detectives, small group of ADAs that oversaw all of these cases, and that we in our city hold more than 50% of our state's exonerations, though we only make up 3% of its population.
So say that again. That when you mentioned the term exonerations, people found later in life or later while they're still incarcerated that the judicial system at that point said that they were innocent, although early 5 or 10 or 15 years prior, judicial system said they were guilty.
Yeah, and in most cases it's more like 20 or 30 or 35 years prior. The judicial system said they were guilty, and I think that's the part, is that it's easy to convict, but to have truth actually kind of like, the wheels of justice turn extremely slow on post conviction, and so you see these slow, drawn out processes. And this current situation that we're advocating for is a case that's 31 years in the making.
And what case might that be?
Malik Jones, and not so this is the, to me, one of the most interesting points of this is that New Haven was home to two Malik Jones, one who was unfortunately and tragically killed by the police in 1996, another who was incarcerated and framed by the police department in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And
the one you mentioned that was murdered by the police. Emma's and Jimmy's son.
Yes.
He was in the house, my house, maybe 4 to 5 weeks prior. 4 to 5 weeks prior, talking to my son. But continue. And I use the term murder, not loosely, but when you think of Fred Hampton and other murders. And,
I'm with you. Yeah.
So, but continue.
And into that, yeah, and that's how small our city is. Malik was like my big brother on the school bus. You know, I was a little kid in the school bus. He made sure I was all right with the school bus, and he lived around the corner from my grandmother. And every time I saw him, it was always really good. A lot of love, a lot of camaraderie, and so we hold so much in our community. You know, that never really gets resolved. And so, and with the other Malik, you know, there's someone who, as a child, I also grew up seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And the system became a really good friend of mine, like a big brother. And, you know, 31 years ago, the police charged him with a homicide in New Haven that had nothing to do with. And it was a known fact by then, at that time, he had nothing to do with it. You know, right now we have like a popular TV show called The First 48. And the reason why it's called The First 48 because most cases, the evidence, the truth in most cases is revealed. Whether they make an arrest in the first 48 hours, they know exactly what transpired in the first 48 hours. And if you examine the first 48 hours of this particular case, then you can see that this was clearly a malicious prosecution and a fraudulent arrest because they know who did it. And I briefly want to just bring in the deceased. I want to bring in Eddie Hart because this young man has not had justice done for him.
Mm-hmm.
He has been a pawn in all of this, and his family continues to suffer. Like they have to relive all of this now because the police chose to use the death of their loved one as a pawn in what they wanted done and what they were doing, then really seek justice for a family. And so 31 years ago.
Go ahead.
No, please.
No, you should complete that sentence, please.
Oh, okay. So 31 years ago, Eddie Hart's life was tragically, you know, tragically taken at St. Raphael's Hospital while visiting a friend. And, you know, what transpired out of that was anything but justice.
And again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and James Jeter's with us, and Don McCauley Jr. Don, I want to bring you in because we're going to still focus on just this one case, but unfortunately, it's just not one case. But we're going to use it as an example for this show. And you know, I want to end when we get it like around 11:50 or 11:45, talking about the future, whether we see these dynamics still being in play, whether we see what the future might hold in terms of our crystal ball. But Don, you called me 2 or 3 weeks ago at 10 o'clock, and not that I'm not always open to talking to you at any time of the day, but I had, when I saw your name come across my screen, I said, this better be, you know, reasonably important, not pertaining to sidewalks or my automatic role or anything like that. But so let me pick up it. I picked up out of curiosity, and you laid on my heart some stuff that really caused me to really say, let's just do this show at this point in time.
So what's the question?
So tell me
what I call you?
What generated your feeling driven to kind of enable us to kind of talk today on Friday, September 15th?
So I've kind of watched James' work and Mr. Jetta's work over the past couple years. And I think not just this case and other things that individuals have worked on have thought about what does it look like for folks to reorient themselves in society or just wrongful convictions. And so in this particular case, I was young. I think I had to be 5 or 6, still living in a close proximity to where the incident transpired, Winthrop Avenue, living in the community for majority of my life. I felt very connected, and it shaped a lot of us in terms of space, but also understanding that policing in its space has also been a large conversation in my own personal research.
Mm.
So even though I do work around athletics and entertainment, how I am profiled or how folks that I deal with are profiled in a particular way says a lot about how policing operates. And even in my just personal interactions, there have been times like, oh, you look like you a particular size and everything else. So this particular case resonated with me.
Mm.
And there are other cases and friends that have had these situations. Um, I think for me, I rest on the opinion that there are those that are innocent that have a larger space of proving themselves innocent and a difficulty, but also those that are guilty that are kind of like egregiously punished.
Mm.
And so when I see this point, I think about the students that I work with in different spaces that I work with, I think it becomes important that somebody has to step in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And a lot of times the person that steps in the middle may have something to lose or doesn't have something to lose. And I think that this is a cause and a topic that I'm very much interested in. And not just because I'm interested, I think that there should have been more work done.
Mm-hmm.
But also, and I'll James, if I'm cool to say this, the way the topic is actually casted in terms of saying how the judicial system operates in a way where you have to deal with appeals and deal with the court system versus potentially some neglect or gross misconduct on a policing stage or policing level to say, well, this should have probably never happened. And so we are trying, justice is trying to do this particular thing and retroactively try to create a atmosphere of justice, but it's in a context that probably should have never happened.
Mm. Mm.
And I don't want to provide other examples, but we just see other things that are happening now. I've
Yeah,
used
man.
Massachusetts
Mm-hmm.
example, the student that potentially could have tried to drown or playing, and this is vacated or it's exonerated or the person's able to go home. And the reality is that the court decided at that moment to vacate particular things. But the reality is like, how does a person work? Because the justice system works in a very unique way where now I have to justify the appeal of the appeal
Mm-hmm.
versus saying that the evidence of proof for that person to be in the place wasn't really justified in that manner. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we retroactively think about justice in their specific arms and the gates and the traps in particular ways?
Mm-hmm.
Can I interject? I also think that
Absolutely.
how do we retroactively look at justice and at within because I don't think you can look at justice or enact justice without enacting a reckoning
Mm-hmm.
to a culture and a time period, and it's not one that anyone wants to revisit. Like I really look at the '90s as a generation that everybody just like willfully wants to forget.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and that's all. Like everybody, like we had a time period in our culture to me that was so significant in the shift that we now currently see, and there wasn't it was the bridge between two generations, and it was like the ugliest time.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was no like right. I mean, honestly, today scares me because it so looks like 1994 in our
And
culture.
and
But
James, before we go back to 1994, just close the loop a little bit for our readers about the current status of Mr. Jones.
oh yeah, so briefly, if you just let me go back to the first 48 hours, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna tell you why it's important. So the
Please.
first 48 hours, there was an eyewitness to the shooting. And it was a friend of Eddie Harp's, and she cooperated. That night, she told the police everything she saw, and she gave a description of the shooters. This is 1 in the morning, right? 1 o'clock in the morning. She's the only eyewitness. She doesn't know anybody involved in any of this stuff except her friend who just lost her life. Um, by 9 o'clock that morning, one of the assailants confesses to one of his associates, right? And the reason why he confesses is because two young ladies came through where they hang out and kind of got into an argument with them about the death of Eddie Hart and said, I know y'all had something to do with it. So he pulls his friend aside, says, we need to go and get guns because these guys might come through. Last night, me and another individual, we shot and killed that boy at the hospital. The individual that he confesses to, within the next 3 hours, he's at New Haven Police Department telling the police what he just found out from one of the assailants. So within the first 24 hours, you have an eyewitness testimony, and then you have a third-party confession that supports exactly what the eyewitness says she saw, right? And so then you also have an interview because when the names were given to the police, they went and picked up the other assailant. And when they asked him, where was he at the night of the shooting? He said, I was on Bear Street, and he named the other assailant as the person he was with. When they asked him, what does he have on? He described the exact same outfit that Sheila McCrae says one of the shooters had on, right? And they both fit the description. She says under 6 feet, between 130 and 140 pounds. And so within the first 48 hours, you had your case wrapped up for you, but it didn't fit the narrative of a group of detectives and what they wanted to do. And so weeks later, they found someone addicted to crack cocaine who had got caught with crack cocaine, and they convinced them to sign a statement against Malik Jones, saying that they saw Malik do the shooting. Now, they described a very movie-esque scene. He ran out with two guns turned sideways, and he was shooting into the car. Malik had been shot in the hand a week prior to this shooting in a botched robbery. Someone tried to rob him. It was a struggle. He got shot in the hand. 3 days prior to the shooting, he had surgery on his hand. This is his dominant hand, his left hand. So there was no way he had two guns, right, to begin with. And they knew this, but they used that statement to lock him up. Upon locking him up, they convinced the younger assailant, who they were interviewing and had arrested also, to now turn state's evidence against Malik. So come time for trial, they never called the original witness that they locked him up on because they know they couldn't, because it didn't fit. It didn't fit anything. There was no way that this story could possibly be true. They had the medical records and they had the ballistics reports. So they put on. So his case came down to one of the assailants reporting something new, because when asked who was he with and where was he originally named the other assailant. He never mentioned Malik in any of the statements. They interviewed him twice. Now he introduces a third shooter. Malik being a third shooter, him being a shooter, and the other assailant, who by the time they went to trial had been killed in New York after three shooters. The thing is that the crime scene investigation doesn't support his testimony, and neither does the ballistics. So the state knew. The state knew in 1992 what they were doing. They knew in 1995 that they were fraudulently putting on a case against an innocent man, and they pursued it. And the younger assailant, he didn't want to testify. They threatened to take away his deal, and they threatened to pursue a life sentence if he didn't go up there and testify. So he testified under duress. Like they willfully pushed a fraudulent case into this man. That was in 1990. That was 1995, his first trial, his first appeal, which he was denied, was in 1997. So just recently, on August 10th of this year, 2023, a federal judge overturned his case, stating that the appeals court got it wrong. Right? So we're talking, she's saying that 25 years ago, they made the wrong decision based on his trial that happened 27 years ago on an arrest that happened 31 years ago. And right now, his case has been overturned on the denial of allowing the person who heard the confession to testify, and his lawyer's failure to do any investigation. He never even talked to the only eyewitness that had nothing to gain other than justice for her friend. He never even talked to her. So these were the issues that his case was overturned on. But he is still sitting in prison because the state has chosen to appeal the decision. Right? This is a choice now that the state is consciously making once again.
As we speak right now, he still is behind bars.
He's still behind bars.
Brother McCauley, what respond to that? And let me just say, I'm in debt to Paul Bass at the New Haven Independent for kind of securing the federal communication license to kind of start this low power station, and so he's allowed me to really bring people on, and not to disparage or character assassinate anyone or any individual or any institution, but just to exercise our free speech rights to the extent that they haven't been infringed upon before. So I really appreciate what you just said, James. Donna, any response to what you just heard? Because if someone had watched what I was as you were speaking, James, I went through the movie again, the movie in my mind, because you described it so distinctly and clearly. But any response to what you've just heard James say in terms of what was the state's motivation? Was did the state have some other ulterior motive? I'm just curious
So I
occurred to
can't
you.
at the time I'm young, but I can't speak to the state's motive. What I will speak to is the conversation about objective and,
Mm-hmm.
and finding a place in a person to be responsible. And I think that I'm saying that I'll say gross misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to close cases and find the particular person that's connected or persuade other individuals to participate in a particular case to make their particular case. And I think that's somewhat problematic. If the evidence does not prove that this individual is in a particular space, the evidence is not evident or evidence is not present for this particular person, I think it becomes difficult for citizens to have confidence in the institution.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to have, to some degree, we want to have a level of confidence in the institution. But to see this particular year or generation of policing, which I'm not going to say it's completely unchanged, but there are some similarities in terms of how things are happening across this country. But the conversation is, if nothing points to this person being in a particular place and time, then what is the motive?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything that transpires in time that is taken is really about how do we devalue the humanity of the individual. And so my comments or feelings are about the state can't do anything about lost time. It's time taken for a particular initiative or program during a particular regime
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that that,
Mm-hmm.
that does not have to be that's not held accountable for particular actions
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
and practices and culture. Yeah. Go ahead.
and I think that the other part is that we like to look at other people's backyards and inside their closets and be like, ooh, like, you know, I don't think that we live in a state that is particularly keen on cleaning house or looking inside what lies in their closets. And you get to a place in culture, right? Like I remember one time having a conversation with a movement out of Bridgeport that was getting super active around the shootings by police in Bridgeport, right? And I asked them, well, have you looked at the claims of just simple assaults by police? And they were like, no. And I was like, well, I think you should. And the reason why I said I think you should is because you don't just come to a place where you feel comfortable shooting people. Like there has to be a culture built, and it has to start somewhere, and it has to escalate and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a culture today where, you know, there's a comfortability with being uh not just the arresting officer, but judge and executor, right? And you have to develop that. And so, you know, and we can't get tired of pushing the historical narrative of this country because we lose if we do. You know, there are many people that look to squash it, but we have to push it. And so when you come from a era that ends slavery, you know, under slavery, there was one question that was constantly published upon, and that was, do these African descendants have the capacity to be moral?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then at the end of slavery, that immediately shifts to, do they have the capacity not to be criminal?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we've been dealing with this criminality wrapped around our frames. It's the reason why, you know, Don, who's a doctor, and me, who's formerly incarcerated, both run the same risk driving in separate cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
It had nothing to do with the actual records or actions, just everything to do with what has been attached to our bodies. And so we, out of that, when you have this era of mass incarceration, you also get this era of a particular cultural policing where police have been given the license to play what they would say above the law, I would say beneath the law, um, and crack a few eggs to make an omelet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's been culturalized through TV shows. We accept it. So the suburbs accept it because it makes them feel safe about what's going on in our communities. And so no one, well, not no one, but those who live outside our community are concerned with what's going on in our community. And our community is too enthralled in it and in what's going on to really have, like, we're wading water. We don't know how to really navigate through it. And we have this generation that suffered at its own hands and at the hands of the police. Reagan was like the deregulator, right? He deregulated television, deregulated Wall Street. Well, through contrary, he also deregulated streets. Like, we had an influx of finances coming to our communities through drugs, I've never seen before, and it was open to anybody who went outside. And it caused so much chaos in our communities that a lot of that our harm began to be at our hands.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never experienced that as a people. Like, we've never had that experience until this generation, where we were the largest cause of harm in our communities, and it was our kids. And what do you do with that? What do you tell a child who can go outside and earn more than their parents can? Not to, right? When they grew up in reality, always having more month than money, and now all of a sudden that's a shift. It's the only shift that's been that they can see, in their limited capacities of because they don't see outside their community.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this one aspect combined with this particular brand of policing, and that particular brand of policing in itself was illegal. And in New Haven at that time, you had a group of officers who were better drug dealers than the drug dealers because they were able to rob the drug dealers and force them to sell drugs for them. And this is the part of the history of our town's policing that doesn't get discussed. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not every cop. It's a group.
Yeah, sure.
A group.
And I'll urge people to kind of Google Billy White if they so choose, and they'll see what's at least in the printed record about Billy.
In the printed record, and he was at that time the head of the task. So if your head is willing to do this, what is everybody underneath him? What has culturally been developed within the drug task force? If the head of it is willing to go to these lengths this late in his career,
Mm-hmm.
what has he done throughout his career that's brought him to this place, right?
Yeah.
And what is now the culture that he oversees and creates? And these are the things that we don't want to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll add to James' point. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we use for culture. There is this kind of heroic idea around policing and that we understand in social media and in space. And so when we give them that cloud, which we call qualified immunity, it operates in a particular place where power is abused. They have the access, and knowingly you have the access and power to do as you will, to move things. And I think the reason that we're here now is getting at the core versus the legal system. It's saying that how are individuals police and exercising the culture of policing, where we have this kind of heroistic mindset that to some degree is negligent. It's an abuse of power. That we do not have a system that's counter to hold it accountable for the specific actions that we're specifically talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we romanticize this idea of like this policing space to protect and serve, but then how does protecting and serving deal with poverty?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How does it have a conversation with poverty? Does it protect not to protect poverty, but how does it protect those that are like indefensible in certain spaces?
And James, say, as we have about 20 more minutes, and I do want to talk about, James, your current involvement in terms of, if not immediate solutions, just working toward that path toward liberation and justice. And same thing for you, uh, Junior, Dr. Macaulay Jr., et cetera. But James, close the loop a little bit. Not necessarily close the loop on the Malik story. He's still incarcerated. Where are we with the appeal process? If anybody wants to get involved or kind of assist, or do you know
Yeah.
who's representing him?
There's something a little sketchy going on with representation. I think that we'll be able to speak to that a little, not today, but at some point about
Okay.
that points out the larger relationality that I think is a huge issue in this state with uh a community of the legal community and how friendships and relationships trump justice, trump truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think that's an issue that we need to speak to because it's an issue that's actually getting highly in the way of anything happening, or the fact that it takes 31 years to get to this point. Um, the state has stated their intent to appeal. There's actually no legal. I mean, they have the right to file an appeal. They have the right to waste more tax dollars, a lot of tax dollars on fighting something that will not be reversed. This ruling will not be reversed. This ruling is a lot lighter than it should be. His Brady claim, and this is the part that our system that I don't know if people know, but like uh, Malik was a pro se litigant until his family found money to pay for his lawyers, and his representation has been questionable.
Meaning like
And it's
a public defender represented him.
No, meaning that Malik was pro se. Malik filed all of his own motions, all of his
Oh,
own. He
did
was representing
his own
himself.
work. Oh.
Yeah, and to be honest, because a lot of times these men, I was in the cell with him. I understand how the mind of an innocent person works now because of that. Like they don't think through anything else. He spent his days with legal work all over the cell, creating his own, um, uh, piecing evidence together, researching. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is his life,
Mm-hmm.
finding his way out of something that he didn't that was on him that didn't belong on him.
Mm-hmm.
And so he knows his issues in this case better than anyone. His lawyers amended and changed his Brady claim brief, which harmed him. And then I think the good thing that we were able to do at Full Citizens was that we were able to get around between 70 and 80 people into a courtroom to witness to witness
Mm-hmm.
these oral arguments from community and to witness how poor of a job that was done when it came to pushing claims against the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
Because his prosecutor is now a pretty prominent judge in the state. Um, and so, because they filed their intent, he on October 2nd, which is actually National Exonerations Day, the judge will they have to October 2nd to state why they don't want him released on bond and whether or not they actually intend on appealing. My personal opinion is that they're trying to wait out a news cycle, and that's why they keep him in prison. Like there's been too much publicity in state around his case, and they'd rather try to have things die down because there's so much more to come out. Like I'm not at liberty to reveal everything
Mm-hmm.
concerning
Mm-hmm.
his case, and I think that hearing it from him and allowing him to talk through it is the best way for it to come out. So um, I think there's that those are some of the motives at the root of this. And when we talk about police, and I do want to point out the fact that like concerning this same prosecutor and some of the same detectives, you have the Scott Lewis and Stefan Moran case that was overturned, and in large part, some of that wouldn't have happened if Sergeant wouldn't have come forth and said that I, there's no way these guys should be in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had left and went to Bosnia because he was in the reserves, and when he came back and found out that they were incarcerated, he was the first one to sound the alarm that all the evidence gathered in this case was gathered illegally. I know that it would never happen if I hadn't left, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so in the same way that you have a detective in Mali's case who, he testified that there was no support in evidence in
Mm-hmm.
ballistics or in the crime scene to support their only eyewitnesses, the only eyewitness evidence, the only eyewitness testimony. And so you have these dualities, right? And I think sometimes it becomes more confusing because of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think we hold hard to the belief that protecting and serving is a full on department concept, and that there's never an entity within it that is only looking to protect their own interests and to serve their own interests. But yet it's evident that's what we have. And
Mhm.
you don't crack any of that without having someone inside be
Mm.
willing to come forth and say, "Yo, this is what's happening."
Well, you've offered up, and I hope you'll take me up. I'd like to offer up us to kind of resume whenever the timing is right for us to kind of do the part two or part three, part four.
Looking forward to it.
Don, before I come to you, I just want to ask James as we kind of wind down. We have about 10, 15 minutes, 10 minutes actually. Your current involvement, unpack. You mentioned Dwight, you mentioned Yale, you mentioned Justice. Unpack those titles that you have and what's on your plate moving forward.
Yeah. So Full Citizens Coalition is a Connecticut-based action group that seeks to undo the unjust harm of felony disenfranchisement. We go after civic engagement. We go after the voting rights of our people, because it has harmed our community with an impact that I don't think we are any longer in a generation of what we see.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our main priority. Up until Rep. King Green in 2001 had gotten voting rights back for those with felonies in general. We had our communities in an era we were incarcerating at an extremely high rate, being locked out completely.
Mm.
And so, in that one passing of law in 2001, you had the restoration of voting rights to over 100,000 people in our communities. And if you think through the impact of 30 years of being locked out and what that does to our homes,
Mm.
because the conversation ceases to happen in our homes, right? And once
Mm-hmm.
that happens, it no longer happens in our communities. And so, it was 20 years later where after a 3.5 year campaign, we were able to successfully restore voting rights back to everyone who steps out of a prison the first day home, whether you're on parole or not. Everybody's rights are restored to them, and now we're fighting with full on enfranchisement. And all of my work, even at the White Hole, is still rooted in that civic allyship came out of student volunteers canvassing
Mm.
Yale for us, and with the work of Malik, you know, our first our first publications, our first set of researchers were students that came through the White Hall at Yale from between 2019 and 2022.
You're fading out just a little bit.
Yeah, between 2019 and 2022. So we had
Mm-hmm.
some really good students who were willing to do the research, and some great students who were willing to write really in-depth articles that were picked up by the Independent.
And if folks want to kind of get involved or stay in touch or be informed, James, in terms of your activities, what's the best way for that to happen?
Reach out at fullcitizenscoalition.org. Yeah, that's the best way to immediately get involved. Be added to our listserv. We do mailouts on what we're doing, what's been happening, what's the latest around right restoration, the latest around Malik's case, as well as the cases of others. Yeah, so I mean, we do this because we owe it to our community to do it.
Excellent. And Donald, talk to me.
So I'll say for me, my involvement in the case is more so supporting James, but also I'm the medium. So when the documentary came out about those that were exonerated, and me watching the video, I saw a lot of my teammates, I saw a lot of my friends, I saw a lot of students that I work with now,
Mm.
and a lot of them in the K-12 school system are still suffering. So again, I'm the family support. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
supporting the family, understanding, having the conversation, and giving them access, giving them hope, having conversations that they're probably not privy to, or they don't have access to, or have connections to. I stand particularly in that particular gap. Athlete Alliance does focus on athletes specifically, but largely we just kind of focus on community. Athletics becomes like a medium, but the real reality is that what's happening in our community, and I do this merging thing that we've talked about before about Black athletes, Black male criminality, and pipeline to prison. They're all intersected at particular times.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically how Black males operated in particular space by space and size. There are particular relationships in terms of where they should be or their relationship to space, and also why they're participating in a particular sport. So I say all that to say that like I'm an additional arm of what James' work is already is. I was at Sci City and Dwight Hall as a fellow, but my particular work is how does the family operate when folks leave?
Mm-hmm.
How do they become supported? And also thinking about extracurricular activities to create that motivation and energy when folks are grieving on these particular things in the absence of family. So I support the work that's Athlete Alliance Foundation, Athlete Alliance Consulting, and the goal is really to be the middle gap in supporting families and athletics and using it as a tool to support families moving forward.
And Donald, don't leave folks hanging. Share with us your, I won't say ivory tower because you're trying to at least make it, if not black or browner, or at least more Creole or more a little more nuanced. Quinnipiac allows you to kind of step through those gates on an occasional basis.
I think Quinnipiac is definitely open and interested. I've had a great amount of support in my first couple months that I've been at the institution. So diversity and inclusion is definitely one of their hot topics. I do sport entertainment management. But outside of just the classroom, I think that they have an interest in terms of this particular topic. There's collaborations with our law school, our social justice, nursing, mental health. And these topics are interesting. And I think it's been important that Quinnipiac has really not been on the main stage about these particular conversations, and they're willing to have these conversations and move it through and bring programs and counseling and being a viable space for these conversations, where I think some of the other institutions are very hesitant to having these conversations.
Excellent. And Quinnipiac, of course, has a law school also at Quinnipiac.
Yeah,
James,
I was
please.
I was just about to shout out the social justice clinic and Sarah Russell at the law school. They've been like for I was a fellow there in 2019. So for all of our issues, they've been super supportive, including this one right here. They've been like really, really supportive. So
we have about four more.
Stepped up, yeah.
Have about 4 more minutes, everybody. So as whatever's on this, I want to give you guys the last word. But Donna, when you called me that evening, about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, you referenced that James thought that yes, the Malik Jones situation's gotten some press, but the reporting, the context, the press was still the media was still insufficient in terms of telling all of the context of the nuances and context of the story. Wonder, James, if that's still true, and what was the media missing? What has the media been missing thus far in terms of sharing with the community?
I'll get that one to James.
Yeah. I think what's missing the truth of the case. So there's a difference between legal processes and truth. Once you're out of the trial court, everything else is about process. It's about what went wrong in these judicial processes. It's not necessarily about truth. And we've been trying to speak to the truth of the situation. We've been trying to speak to the way that Malik was prosecuted, exactly what transpired in his initial trial and how he came to be incarcerated these past 31 years. And that hasn't been, in larger media, something that anyone would want to talk about. They will print that his case has been flipped. They will print, something that were far more salacious, but weren't dealing with the facts of the case. Even though we're speaking to him, like we would do full-on interviews about the facts of about the facts of what actually happened, and what will get printed is the ruling. And we're saying, okay, there's a gap here though that no one has been willing to really let be heard. And Don really came through. He like me and him. I was just kind of like venting, and he just hit me back with like, "Hey, you want to talk to Tom Ficklin?" I was like, "Thank you." And so this is like relationality working for us as opposed to working against us, because I think that's the issue. Whether it's law, whether it's media, people don't want to harm the relationships. The truth will take a backseat in some cases to relationships. In our state, I see it, throughout these institutions happening far too often.
Interesting.
I'll jump in before we close. I think that what's really said, and I think that for what I've seen in other cases and friends that I've dealt with, that once the case is decided, the appeal goes to a particular space, and then it's not about the particular evidence. It goes to how do I turn over an appeal, and I think that becomes a challenging situation. So understanding the particular legal system, how it operates, because a person should not have been there from the beginning. That is when you talk about justice and or where does individuals decide where the level of justice is that if the person wasn't supposed to be there, what we're paying for is an appeal of a judgment that rendered itself to a particular court or raised it to another court. So it's been escalated in a time where it probably should have never happened. And so and so that conversation, understanding how justice operates and the specific arms of justice operating in that particular way, where it's like, how do you arrive at that? And I don't think a lot of people know that in an appeals court, it's not about another trial. It's about appealing the evidence to visit a trial that needs to be appealed based on the evidence. And that's a whole different conversation, saying, I don't think I didn't get a fair just due.
100%. The fair just due doesn't even resonate in once you get into those processes. It's really processes about processes, so it's yeah. It's like Kafka's The Trial. Like it's crazy how accurate that book is.
Dawn, I want to give you a minute for kind of your last kind of comment or thought, and then James as well.
I'm here for the work. Obviously, I'm at QU. I do sport entertainment management, but again, the core goal is about sport and community. I use sport entertainment as a caveat for things that people are interested in, but there are larger cultural and social issues that happen within those areas that have issues, and so I just use those specific avenues to address other social issues that are undergirded. So I mean, for me, I'm more sociology and psychology versus I'm actually business, but I'm here to support the work in any kind of way I can.
Excellent. And James?
I'm here for a reckoning. Malik's case is an all-encompassing example of an error, and I'm hoping that we come to a place where we're going to examine the error and make right some things that we can and heal from a lot of what transpired. Full Citizens Coalition is looking to do more of this work, looking to bring rights back to our community so we can create our own equity.
Excellent. And again, let's try to come back. I have nothing else to do on Fridays at 11 o'clock, and even I might squeeze in on Monday at 11 o'clock. We broadcast twice a week. And this is so important. I went to Bucknell University in Lewisburg, and you could see the Lewisburg Penitentiary from the campus. So I've been kind of into this issue for some time, and I appreciate your sharing from the heart, gentlemen. That's it, Harry. That's it. Let's go to the last poets, and everybody enjoy the weekend. James, get a quick shout out. November. So, share with the folks about November and why they should participate now that they have the right to vote.
Oh, well, because politicians only respect two things: the support and the power against their support. So we can choose which one we choose to be, and then we can also understand that once you vote, they work for you. These are your employees. So think about it in that manner, and think about the benefit to your community. The vote in our community should not be controlled by a minimal population. We are the majority of our communities. We can run our community. We can own our communities, but we got to turn out.
Excellent. Thanks. Let's turn out and turn up, right?
That's right.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Understand what black is. The source from which all things come. The security blanket for the stars. Understand what black is. It's not a color, it's the basis of all colors. It is not a complexion, it is a reflection of all complexions called human. And out of this blackness, passion flows like a river. Feelings tell the truth. Song and dance and making you laugh are family members. Understand